Good afternoon, everyone. Just before I start, a bit of a show of hands. Has anyone ever been to a sustainability presentation before? Okay, so that's a funny story. So when Douglas first asked me to do this, I was thinking about retitling it to Why Nobody Shows Up to Sustainability Presentations. I think that might have been a very pertinent title. Although it's a very popular buzzword, sustainability, it's not something that people do a lot of. And my talk today may actually convince you that your company might not need a sustainability department at all. Maybe a little bit controversial, but I'll talk you through my rationale behind that. So my name is Adam McEwan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Hero Experiences Group. And let me just start by giving you a bit of an idea of who we are and what we do. So that's where our very successful story stopped at lockdown, March 2020. So us, like everyone else, I assume, had to really try and work out how do we reinvent ourselves? Where do we go from here? How do we adapt? And what we looked at is what can we learn from this experience? What can we learn from COVID? And more importantly, what can we learn from our past? We had been very concentrated on sustainable tourism. And we thought, what can we learn from that? What can we adapt? And we basically forged ahead on that. So these are the major 4 points that I'm going to cover in the next few minutes on what did we learn from COVID. So of course, as a very much environmentally sustainable business, we thought, how do we actually adapt these principles that we had been doing for so many years? How do we adapt that to other business units that we look at? So for example, reimagining, we always had to reimagine what we did in the desert, do it differently, do it better. So how do we do that with all the other departments? We had to reimagine what our company was going to look like, what our group looked like. We had to make sure that we reduced the dependence on resources that we had, tried to make the most of what we had. We had to try and recover, like the environment needs to recover. We need to basically give it a rest. So we had to do that with our whole organization. We had to use the pillars of sustainability as pillars for the rest of our business. So what did we become? We focused now not on sustainability, but on survivability. So with survivability, we came up with a few pillars that we were going to look at. And this is why I said at the beginning, maybe you shouldn't look at having a sustainability department. Nobody shows up for those meetings anyway, I assume, if you're anything like most companies. And instead, look at a survivability department. Normally, survivability is the responsibility of one person. It's the CEO, the managing director, general manager, or the owner. One person shoulders that responsibility. Well, that's how it was before COVID. What happens with a survivability department? Your survival becomes a group endeavor. Everyone's engaged in the survivability of the company. It's actually in everyone's best interest that the company survives. So creating a department that actually engages everyone in all of these pillars has helped us greatly. The first one, of course, is the environment. We have seen what happened to Mother Nature when we gave her a bit of a rest. You've probably all seen footage of gazelles running through suburbs and how much foliage is now in the desert just from everyone giving it a bit of a rest. So that has encouraged us to double down on our environmental commitment, and we're very, very proud that we're now working hand in hand with a very, very fruitful ecosystem in the desert. The second one is staff. Again, show of hands, anyone heard of the Great Resignation? So for those of you who don't know, the Great Resignation is an occurrence that's happening right now where people around the world are starting to quit their jobs in record numbers. My hypothesis is that people are doing that simply because they now understand that they are a disposable resource for their company. Unfortunately, through the pandemic, people went without pay. People were discarded without much of a goodbye. So they realize that when times are good, times are good. When times are bad, they are disposable. So this was one, and I could say our major focus during the pandemic, was to focus on our staff. We actually, during the pandemic, started a wellness department headed by, actually, a person in the crowd here, Sita, who is our Chief Happiness Officer. And although that might sound flowery to some, it's actually a C-level position because we're putting that first and foremost at everything that we do. In fact, it's strange for me that people cannot pay their staff. They can disrespect them, they can talk down to them, they can treat them like disposable commodities, and then come out and say, I want you to care. I want you to care about my business. I want you to care about my guests. I want you to care about the environment. It sounds ridiculous to me. How can you disrespect someone and expect them to care? So for us, we really focused on making sure that people have a growth journey, that they are respected, that they learn, that they are maybe crossing departments. We've had many people in the pandemic crossing departments, learning new skills, taking on new experiences. So for us, one of the cores is our staff. Of course, guests are central to everything. We wouldn't be in business if we didn't have guests, so they're very, very important to us. But again, it's about showing respect to the guest, that you give them something that's special, something that's unique, and something where they are the hero of the story. So having photos of things that you can't deliver on, over-promising, under-delivering, is something that we absolutely had to avoid. So for us, we wanted to come back better with better service, better training of staff, so that we had, which is what we ended up with, record numbers of satisfied guests. Of course, money is important. Unfortunately, we have seen that without money, you do not survive the pandemic. So being very wise with how you spend money and making sure that you plan for rainy days. My business partner and I had always set things up and said, we're going to make a business that's recession-proof. We'd run a business through the global financial crisis. So we said, we'll make a recession-proof business. We never thought of a pandemic-proof business. That wasn't on our cards. But we were wise enough to have some money set aside for rainy days. And that was enough for us to be able to pay the staff, for example, throughout the pandemic, keep everyone motivated. And when we came back, we were able to scale back immediately to the size that we were before, actually a little bit larger than we were before, because we were anticipating like a big return to business, which luckily happened. So being financially savvy is very important as well, as is looking at your processes. So making sure that you're streamlined and you're optimized and that you're running an efficient operation as possible. So these sound familiar. If you've ever tried to come up with a sustainable business plan, we just applied these business principles to all different aspects of our business. So what was the result for us? We were able to bounce back very quickly. As was just mentioned, as far as bouncing back from 2019, we actually maintained profitability throughout the pandemic. We never actually went negative. We were always able to stay positive. We have lots of loyal guests that have come back to us. We have a very happy, engaged workforce that are now become partners in our survivable journey rather than just a resource. And of course, we've had the highest revenue that we've ever had, actually, when we're closing out this financial year. So it's been a fantastic response. So why get rid of your sustainability department? Because as it turns out, it doesn't matter. And it pains me to say that for someone who's been doing sustainable initiatives for years and years and years. But this was a study by a university that studied the elements that went into survivability of a business. What are the factors that are most important? And unfortunately, the environment came down dead last. But look at what's at the top. Behavior. And it's a long way at the top, 49.6. And look at what the subheadings of those were. Empathy, compassion, and ethics. I mean, they are the fundamental things you need to look at for any sustainable project. So by adapting empathy, compassion, and ethics, that sounds like a pretty good formula to me to recovering from something like COVID. And as you can see, empathy was the top of that list. So it seems that empathy is the superpower of businesses. It's not beating your competitors. It's not record profits. It's actually empathy, because empathy touches all the elements that are important in your business. It's showing respect and being kind to the environment, but it's also same for your staff, same for your guests. And obviously, if you have happy staff, you have happy guests. If you have happy guests, you have a happy bottom line. If you have a happy bottom line, you have a happy business. So the circle is complete. So rather than focusing on sustainability, we think sustainability should just be one element of your survivability department. We think if you're called to a survivability meeting, that's a meeting everyone will show up to and something that people can engage with. And at the end of the day, we only have one life to live. So you have your story. Are you going to be the hero of your story? A lot of people say that one person can't make a difference. We think they can. By being a hero, it's not doing the easy things, it's doing the hard things, because the hard things are generally the right things to do. So it's your life, your story. Hopefully, after this, you'll be inspired to become a hero. Thank you.
Sustainability. That's just, I kind of think of that as like the peas and carrots, right? That's just another cost center, right? It's not...
it's been viewed as one, right? It's been viewed that sustainability as an expense. If you do it correctly, you save money. For example, we decided very early on to invest in renewable energies for our camps, and they have paid themselves off many times over now. Yes, it's initially a bigger investment.
In what sense?
Well, it's a big investment initially. The alternative for us would be to use diesel generators, but diesel generators, of course, use fuel, which would be much more expensive now at $113 a barrel.
Okay.
But also there's a significant risk of oil leaking from the generators, leaking into the sand, and it keeps on going. Studies have shown that it can actually go all the way into the water table. So by being responsible initially, looking at solar power, we actually saved a lot of money over the years.
Are there things that you do in your experience that are different, things that are observable and noticeable by guests?
We did something that was quite innovative. We're actually the first in the Middle East, I understand, to do this. And we actually installed solar-powered atmospheric water generators. So we looked at, of course, we saved plastic water bottles maybe 5-6 years ago or something like that. And we give everyone stainless steel's renewable bottles. But we thought the water still has to come from a long way. So what about the transit? You're using a lot of CO2 emissions just to get the water. And we were using high quality water. So you can imagine something coming all the way from France out to the Dubai desert. You're using a lot of energy. So we thought if we actually generate our water at source, right at our camp, we can actually cut down on that whole transport. So we do like Voss quality water right there at the camp.
Will guests pay more for a sustainable experience? Do they have to pay more? Is it more expensive to be sustainable?
It shouldn't be, right? In the long run, it shouldn't be. It should be something that saves you money. For example, before we did solar power, we looked at elevating things like water tanks. So we used gravitational force. We looked at LED lighting. We looked at kind of an intelligent design that reduces how much power you need in the first place. So if you do that properly, it shouldn't cost you too much. I feel a little bit sorry for people that have to retrofit something old. I think that's a very different equation. But if you start kind of right from the beginning, it should be a cost-effective means. From your first question on that, we don't believe people will pay a lot of money for a sustainable experience. Potentially 10%, 15%. But again, I don't think being sustainable is the only part of our business that's different. It's an element of our business, but of course, the exclusivity, the privacy, the quality of our F&B, the quality of our guides obviously separates us from everyone else, and that people are willing to pay for.
And I guess, I see like there's a lot of discussion in the industry, especially now, about sustainability. There's research like that's just come out from Booking and others. We've produced some research as well, and it all seems to point that consumers say they want it. Travelers say they want it. They say they're willing to adjust their behavior, and yet at the same time, it seems like flights, like air travel is returning as quickly as possible. I've always had a question about what consumers really say they want and what they're going to, in a piece of research, and what actually happens on the ground when it comes to actually spending money. Like, is it important? Like, is it a key selling point for Platinum Heritage?
I don't think we even use it as a key selling point. I think we do it because it's the right thing to do, and I think it makes it quite a special place to work. When you know that you're positively contributing towards the environment. For example, we are a very small company compared to even some of the last panelists. You can't compare us to the size of IMA, but we've donated millions, maybe 5 million dirhams towards desert conservation, so that we want our guests to feel like they're actually positively contributing. They're leaving it that little bit better than when they found it. And if you look at the environment that we now have in the desert, you can see it's vastly improving. We're protecting areas. We're making sure areas are kind of locked away for conservation. We're collaborating with the conservationists for projects where we see trees growing, desert bushes, the ecosystem really starting to come alive. So we know that from when we started to today, our guests have made a very positive contribution. And I think that's special. That's a special place to work for. And I think that motivates and encourages our whole workforce, that we're not just showing up for a paycheck, we're showing up for something more special than that.
Could the business be bigger if you didn't focus on these things? Like if you were just focusing on, put all that, put the 5 million dirhams into marketing, put it into Google or Facebook or...
Potentially. It depends on your ethos. I mean, Simon Sinek very famously said, people buy what you do, not how you do it. Something like that, right? No, why you do it, right? So why we do what we do is very special. We started the company not to be the biggest in the industry. We started because we wanted to do something special. And I think people buy into something special. So could we have been bigger? Possibly. But what would we have had to have sacrificed to do that? Maybe we would have had to start dune bashing. Maybe we would have had to start doing buggies. Maybe we would have had to start doing things that are counter to what we know is right.
So this is my first time in Dubai, and I've got some free time on Wednesday. And I was looking at some of the different websites about potential safaris to do, and there's some really interesting experiences where I can go dune bashing. Should I book one of those?
I mean, freedom of choice, of course. I would strongly discourage you to. This is something that we've been petitioning for the industry for a long time. Has anyone been out to the desert, just the open desert? Okay. So most of you haven't been out to the open desert. So probably what you expect if you go out is just a lot of emptiness, a lot of sand, some beautiful dunes, and that's about it. What the truth is there's actually a whole thriving ecosystem. There's lots of animals, there's lots of plants, and about 95% of those animals are subterranean and nocturnal. So they live under the ground and they only come out at night. So when you're dune bashing, you're actually drawing up around the side of the dunes. You're pushing that sand down to the bottom of the dunes, which is where there's the most humidity. Where's the most humidity is where all the animals and the plants thrive. Also, the bigger animals like desert hares and desert foxes, they actually bury into the side of the dunes and they kind of sleep in the dunes at night. So when you're driving over them, you're actually burying those animals alive. So dune bashing is absolutely abhorrent. It's an absolute environmental disaster. We've been trying to encourage people to be as responsible as possible. As much as dune buggies might be fun and as much as dune bashing might be fun, your fun is coming at a huge expense to the animals and the wildlife in the desert.
But it seems like it's a pretty big enterprise here.
I think people are starting to understand a little bit. From when my business partner and I started to where we are now, we see that the dune bashing safari is not as popular. It has become a fairly cheap commodity. It has become mass market, I think less enjoyable. The reputation has not been great. Most people, when they think desert safari in Dubai now, think cheap food, belly dancing, and dangerous driving. It's not a great reputation for the industry to have, but we do start seeing niche players coming up that are looking to do something a little bit more special, and we encourage that. We think it's a big, vast desert. There's lots of things to do out there. Destroying the environment and watching half-naked belly dancers is probably not the ideal thing to do.
So if it's cheap food, belly dancing, and dune bashing that's the image of the old safari, what's the image of the new safari?
I think the new safari is more about being in touch with nature. So there's overnight camping in the desert now that's becoming very popular, or glamping is becoming very popular. Things like desert yoga, astronomy in the desert. There's a lot more to do than just go out for dinner in the desert. We do some beautiful conservation drives, for example, and of course flying balloons over the desert. You don't leave any trace whatsoever. You're flying over the dunes. The animals are completely unobstructed. You don't need roads, you don't need pathways, you don't need tracks, you don't have broken down vehicles, you don't need recovery vehicles. It's a beautiful, kind of very zero impact way of seeing the desert as well. So we're starting to see a rise of those more popular activities out in the desert than just simply dune bashing.
Yeah. So you also mentioned to me when we were chatting that I think on some of your experiences you don't serve alcohol.
We don't serve alcohol in any of our experiences. Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, there's probably three main reasons. One, we're trying to authentically as possible showcase the culture and the environment of the UAE. Alcohol is not part of the culture here. So while people can at their hotel or by the pool, we think to dedicate one night to actually truly understand the background of the country here, to get to understand the culture and how the religion and the culture kind of are intertwined, we think it's quite special not to do that. The second reason is that our camp is actually located inside the property of one of the local royal family members. So out of respect to him, we don't do that. And we also think the desert should be an inclusive environment. So everyone should go out there and feel equally inclusive. So even if you have 100 people in the desert and there's only one person that doesn't drink, it's against their religion, it's against their beliefs, makes them feel uncomfortable. All of a sudden, you've basically started something that's against being inclusive. You've actually isolated someone, you've disrespected someone, and again, it's all about empathy. We try to empathize with everyone so everyone can come out and be comfortable.
Have you lost business, or have you had dissatisfied customers as a result?
I wouldn't say dissatisfied, because we make it very clear when we advertise that we don't serve alcohol. We do it quite proudly. We don't try and hide the fact. Yeah. As far as corporate groups, some corporate groups will insist upon that. Again, they have the old school idea that you have to have alcohol in order for anyone to enjoy themselves. We hope that they're not kind of making things worse by kind of ostracizing a certain element of their group. But we lose, I would estimate, probably 40% of our business for the corporate group who insist upon alcohol.
So you will not do a corporate group?
We won't do it a corporate group with alcohol.
If they insist on alcohol.
We still have plenty of corporate groups, and we could do a lot of name dropping on who's who have comes out with us. Okay. But the biggest brands, the biggest car manufacturers, they've come out with us, and they actually prefer the fact that we don't do it. So we've lost some, but I bet you we've gained some as well.
Does being sustainable mean there's a limit to growth? I mean, not just for Platinum Heritage and Hero Experiences, but like, is there just a limit to the number of people that can experience the desert, that can do safaris? Yeah,
I think so, but I think there should be as well, and I think this is something that destinations like Venice, for example, have looked at. When is too much too much? There is a limit, there is an upper cap. So we think that's okay. If there's a limited number of people that go through, over-tourism is not a topic that you're talking about now, but you may be in 2 or 3 years' time talking about over-tourism again.
I think sooner than 2 or 3 years, yeah.
But I think the world has benefited from not having streets full of people in places like Venice, from places like Angkor Wat not having 2 to 3 hour waits all to get into the same place as soon as you walk in the door. So unfortunately, if some people are kind of priced out of the market, that's an unfortunate thing. But if the extra revenue that goes through protects the environment so that it's available to future generations, I think that's a worthy sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty amazing vision of the future. Ladies and gentlemen, Adam McEwan, Platinum Heritage and Hero Experiences. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much.